I studied English for 5 years and couldn't even hold a basic conversation. I was frustrated, lost, and ready to give up. But everything changed the moment I stopped studying English and started living with it. In this episode of Kunzy Podcast English, I'll share how I mastered English at home without tutors, without traveling abroad, just by changing my mindset and building powerful daily habits. If you're still struggling, this might be the turning point you've been waiting for. Part 1. The early years of learning English, a journey full of struggles. I still vividly remember the feeling I had when I first opened an English book. The letters and words looked like they were from another planet. I couldn't understand a single thing. I couldn't read. I couldn't listen. Every sentence, every word just passed by like meaningless symbols. I started learning English from absolute zero, and for many years that number seemed to stay the same. I did everything they said I should do. I bought grammar books, printed out stacks of flashcards, and spent hours every day memorizing vocabulary. I crammed tenses, simple present, past, future, and I believed that if I just studied hard enough, somehow my brain would magically absorb it all. But that never happened. Even though I could sometimes score well on grammar quizzes, I still couldn't understand even a basic conversation. When I watched movies, everything sounded too fast, and all I could hear was a blur of incomprehensible noise. I felt confused, frustrated, and began to ask myself, maybe I'm just not good at languages? There were moments when I cried after studying, not because the lessons were difficult, but because of the overwhelming sense of helplessness. I felt like I was swimming endlessly in an ocean without knowing where the shore was. My friends who started learning English around the same time as me all seemed to be progressing. Some were getting international certificates, others were confidently talking to foreigners. And there I was, still stuck with basic phrases like, "How are you?" and "I'm fine, thank you." I seriously thought about giving up. After 4 to 5 years of trying with no clear results, who wouldn't feel discouraged? I began to avoid English. I didn't want to hear it, see it, or talk about it. I told myself, maybe English just isn't for me. But looking back now, I realized something important. The problem wasn't me. It was the method. I had been learning the wrong way for years. I was stuffing my head with disconnected knowledge without knowing how to bring it to life. I was studying for tests, not for real communication. And no matter how hard I worked, the outcome was always the same. Nothing changed. Those early years of learning English were filled with failure. But those failures taught me one crucial truth. You can't reach your destination if you're heading down the wrong path. I had hit rock bottom. I had wanted to quit. But that moment of despair eventually became the turning point, the beginning of a new journey. One that was finally right for me. Part 2. The realization. The turning point that changed everything. For years, I believed I just wasn't talented enough to learn English. I spent 4, maybe 5 years trying every method I could think of. Studying grammar books, drilling vocabulary with flashcards, filling notebooks with rules and definitions. I worked hard. I showed up every day. But no matter what I did, I couldn't understand native speakers. I couldn't form sentences when I spoke. I couldn't even read a basic conversation without struggling. I thought I had hit a wall, but the truth was, I had been walking in the wrong direction all along. One day, when I was on the verge of giving up, I stumbled across a video about how babies learn languages. The speaker said something that struck me to the core. Children don't study grammar. They listen and imitate. They don't memorize words from a list. They absorb them through real conversations, through living in the language. That was the light bulb moment for me. I realized I was trying to study English like a school subject, like math or science, when in fact, English is a living skill that needs exposure, not memorization. That realization shook me. I had been learning English to pass exams, not to communicate. I was chasing scores, not understanding. My whole mindset was built around performance, not connection. But English, like any language, is meant to be felt, not just known. It's something that lives in your ears, your mouth, your memory, something you experience, not cram. So I made a radical change. I stopped obsessing over grammar drills. I stopped worrying about perfect answers. Instead, I started immersing myself. I listened to English every single day, even if I didn't understand a thing. I watched cartoons, listened to beginner podcasts, and read comic books in English. I stopped forcing myself to memorize. Instead, I let the language flow through me, naturally. The results weren't instant, but slowly things began to shift. I started recognizing familiar phrases. I could guess the meaning of words through context. My ears adjusted to the rhythm of English. And most importantly, I stopped fearing English. It no longer felt like a distant, impossible mountain to climb, but something that I could enjoy, something that felt close. The biggest breakthrough wasn't fluency, it was falling in love with the process. For the first time, learning English felt exciting. No pressure, no panic, just curiosity, just joy. What I learned was this: English isn't something you master with tests or textbooks. It's something you live with, grow with, and build a relationship with. Once I embraced that, everything began to change. And that was the real beginning of my English journey. Part 3. The turning point. A complete shift in learning methods. After realizing that English isn't something to be studied like math, I knew I had to make a radical change. And it was this change in approach that finally turned the tide for me. I made a bold decision. I stopped studying grammar altogether. That might sound reckless to some, but it was an intentional and necessary shift. I knew that continuing down the same path would only lead to the same frustrations. Instead of memorizing rules and analyzing sentence structures, I began to immerse myself in English every single day. My new routine included watching English videos with subtitles. At first, I chose simple content, vlogs, cartoons, or basic dialogues on YouTube. I didn't pressure myself to understand everything. I simply watched, listened, and let the language wash over me, just like a child being exposed to their first words. Gradually, I began to recognize familiar sounds, pick up key phrases, and follow the main ideas. I was improving without even realizing it at first. I also made a conscious effort to replace textbook English with real spoken English. No more robotic, scripted conversations from outdated audio CDs. Instead, I listened to real people speaking in natural tones, with all the slurring, connected speech and idioms that come with authentic conversation. It was messy, it was fast, but it was real, and that made all the difference. I learned how native speakers truly communicate, not just what they say, but how they say it. At the same time, I started reading English daily, but not with dry academic books. I started with children's books, where the language is vivid, simple, and easy to follow. And to my surprise, I didn't feel bored at all. In fact, I felt excited. The stories pulled me in, and the language came alive. I wasn't learning vocabulary. I was experiencing it. I wasn't memorizing grammar. I was absorbing it naturally through story and emotion. This strategic shift from theoretical learning to real-world language exposure was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. English was no longer something I studied. It became something I lived with. I stopped counting how many words I had memorized. I started noticing how much I could understand in a real conversation. I caught myself reacting in English without translating in my head. That's when I knew something had truly changed. What I learned is this: mastering English isn't about how many hours you study. It's about how deeply you immerse yourself in the language environment. When you stop treating English like a school subject and start living in it, you unlock a whole new world of learning. Part 4. The power of input, the importance of receiving first. After changing my approach, I began to realize something fundamental about mastering English. Fluency doesn't come from trying to speak more. It comes from receiving enough input through listening and reading every single day. That's when I discovered the input-first method, a strategy inspired by how children acquire language. Listen and read a lot before trying to speak. I asked myself, how do babies learn to speak their native language without ever studying grammar or being forced to speak? The answer was clear. They are exposed to thousands of hours of spoken language from their parents and environment before they ever utter a word. And I realized the same applies to adults learning a second language. If I wanted to speak English naturally, I needed to immerse myself in it deeply and consistently. So I made a bold choice. I would spend nearly an entire year focused solely on input. Every day, I listened to English podcasts, from casual life stories to more academic content. I watched YouTube videos, TED Talks, movies, and read books I truly enjoyed, all in English. I didn't pressure myself to speak or write right away. I allowed myself to simply listen, to understand, to absorb. And what happened was magical. The more I listened and read, the faster I began to comprehend, and the more familiar the phrases and sentence structures became. Eventually, I could even hear these sentences in my head, even when I wasn't speaking. During this time, I continued to avoid grammar drills. If something confused me during listening or reading, I took a note and explored it later, naturally, without stress. There was no pressure to memorize or produce. I let things flow. I trusted the process. What I discovered after a year of input was profound. Speaking naturally comes from passive accumulation. When I finally started speaking again, I didn't struggle to put sentences together. The words simply flowed, like singing a song I had heard 1,000 times. Because during all those hours of input, my brain had been quietly memorizing rhythms, intonations, and sentence patterns, without me even realizing it. This strategy completely transformed my language learning. I no longer rushed to speak for the sake of speaking. Instead, I focused on building a strong foundation through real language exposure and let speaking emerge organically. Just like a plant needs time and water before it can bloom, our ability to speak English needs nurturing from within through consistent listening and reading. Part 5. Shadowing and speaking practice. Starting to speak English naturally. After immersing myself in English through listening and reading for a long time, something unexpected happened. My brain began to feel familiar with the sounds, rhythm, and structure of the language. English no longer felt like a foreign, difficult code. That was when I knew I was finally ready to move on to the next stage, speaking. But this time, I didn't dive into speaking randomly. I chose a method that many successful language learners swear by: shadowing. Shadowing means repeating immediately after hearing something, trying to imitate the sound, stress, speed, and intonation of native speakers as closely as possible. At first, it was difficult and honestly quite frustrating, but I stuck with it. I started with short, simple videos and podcasts, then gradually moved on to more complex materials. I also began to speak to myself in English. It might sound strange, but voicing my thoughts out loud helped me break the psychological barrier of speaking. I would describe what I saw around me, narrate my day, or imagine conversations in a supermarket, at the airport, or in a restaurant. Every time I practiced, I recorded myself, then listened back critically, checking my pronunciation, fluency, and how natural I sounded. At first, I was shocked by how different my voice and accent sounded from what I imagined. But that shock was the fuel I needed to improve. Beyond just mimicking, I began to create practice scenarios to build real-life fluency. For example, I imagined myself ordering food, doing a job interview, or meeting a foreign friend. I would write out short scripts and practice them repeatedly. Over time, I didn't need the scripts anymore. The words started flowing naturally, as if English had become a part of my reflexes. This method, combining shadowing, self-recording, and scenario-based practice, helped me improve not just pronunciation, but also confidence. I no longer feared making mistakes because I understood that every attempt was a step forward. The most important lesson I learned was this: to speak well, you have to speak, but do it strategically, with awareness and intention. Speaking without thinking won't get you far. But speaking with purpose, tracking your progress, and adjusting along the way, that's what leads to real growth. Part 6. Daily habits. Making English a part of my everyday life. After building a strong foundation in listening, reading, and speaking, I realized something crucial. If I wanted to maintain and truly internalize English, I couldn't treat it as a one-time effort. English had to become a natural part of my daily life, not just a temporary goal, but a lifestyle. I started by changing my environment. I switched the language on my phone to English. All my apps, my YouTube recommendations, podcasts, and even the books I surrounded myself with, everything was in English. Instead of watching local entertainment shows or listening to music in my native language, I started listening to English podcasts during walks, watching English vlogs while eating, and reading English books before bed. Most importantly, I committed to practicing English every single day for at least 1 to 2 hours. Even on the busiest days, I found ways to squeeze it in. The key wasn't forcing myself to study in a stressful way. It was about building flexible, sustainable habits. In the morning, I'd listen to a podcast while brushing my teeth. Around noon, I might read a few pages of an English book. At night, I'd watch a video and do some shadowing practice. These small moments added up to a constant, low-pressure exposure to English. I also stopped measuring my progress based on test scores or the number of textbooks I finished. Instead, I asked myself, how much time did I spend with English today? Did I enjoy it? Did I feel connected to the language? Over time, English stopped being a burden. It became something I looked forward to, something I lived with. I even started thinking in English, making decisions in English, and, surprisingly, sometimes even dreaming in English. The real turning point came when I understood that success doesn't come from intense effort in short bursts. It comes from doing a little every day and doing it consistently. Just like building muscle, Learning a language isn't about waiting for a miracle push. It's about micro efforts repeated hundreds of times. In the end, I didn't master English by chasing goals. I mastered it by building habits. Habits that became part of my identity, part of how I lived, and part of how I saw the world. Part 7. Final reflections. The most important key to success. Looking back on my entire English learning journey, one truth stands out. This is not a sprint. It's a marathon. Mastering English isn't about how smart you are, how many classes you take, or how quickly you memorize grammar rules. It's about something deeper. Patience, passion, and the right mindset. Language is not something you study and complete. It's a living skill, and like any skill, it only flourishes through consistent, intentional practice fueled by genuine curiosity. I used to believe that only those who studied abroad, attended elite schools, or were naturally gifted could truly speak English fluently. But my own journey, learning entirely from home without tutors or expensive courses, taught me that anyone can master English if they choose the right method and commit to the process. It's not about where you are. It's about how you use your time and energy. There are 3 key lessons I've learned through this experience. First, perseverance. English doesn't come in a day or a month. It comes from thousands of small moments, podcasts in the morning, reading at night, shadowing during your commute. Each moment might seem small, but together they build momentum. Second, enjoyment. If you don't love what you're doing, you won't stick with it. You have to treat English not as a chore, but as a friend you're getting to know. Choose content that excites you. Fall in love with the process. And third, the right strategy. Forget the pressure to memorize everything or chase perfect grammar. Instead, build a life where English is present every day, in what you watch, what you read, even how you think. The most powerful realization I had was this: you don't need to be perfect to start, but you do need to start to become better. Every word you understand, every sentence you speak, even with mistakes, is progress. Don't compare your journey to others. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday. If you grow even 1% each day, you're already on the right path. To anyone reading this who's struggling with English right now, you're not alone. I've been there, confused, frustrated, and ready to give up. But through changing how I thought and how I learned, I turned what once felt impossible into something I now live every day. And so can you, if you believe in yourself and never stop moving forward. If you're still struggling with English, just know this: you're not alone. I've walked that same road, full of doubts, mistakes, and restarts. But I made it through. And if I can do it, so can you. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start today, even with the smallest habit. Maybe it's just one podcast, one page of a book, or one sentence you whisper to yourself. Over time, these small steps add up. Your future self will thank you for not giving up. And if this message resonated with you, I'd love for you to like, share, and subscribe. There's more real, honest, and practical English learning waiting for you. I'm here, every step of the way.